Rave in the Redwoods is the second map in our Infinite Warfare Zombies adventure. Taking inspiration from 90s slasher horror, the map pits our characters in the middle of a rave in the Redwoods. When I originally reviewed Rave, it was probably the one map I invested the least amount of time into. This is because the map was the only one I had already completed the main quest for prior to making the video years ago. And when it came time to actually review the map, I didn't complete the Easter egg normally besides just using Director's Cut to refresh my memory on said questline. I had completely ignored mechanics like Ray Vision, the charm system, and all the little goodies the map had to offer. It wouldn't be until years later when I would play the map normally on stream and finally get a taste of what it truly had to offer. Because of this reason, Rave was actually the one map I am most excited about re-reviewing, and the one I feel I did the most dirty out of any of my original reviews. With all that said though, hello there fellow zombie slayers, my name is Stanley557, and welcome back to the second part of our Infinite Warfare Zombies re-review. Today we're going to be looking at the game's second experience, so sit back and relax as we continue to traverse the world of Willard Wyler with Rave in the Redwoods. Rave in the Redwoods seats our characters at Bear Lake, a beloved family summer camp that has been taken over and utilized as the staging grounds for a nearby rave in the Redwoods. The map indulges in many of the same strengths and criticisms that I levied at Zombies in Spaceland, with a few new mechanics and features that make the map its own. But before we get into all of that, let's start out with the story. After destroying the UFO in Spaceland, Poindexter, apparently it's spelled without a T, grabs a piece of the fabled Soul Key. With this piece of the puzzle in hand, our characters are immediately transported to the next film. While this is happening, we turn our attention to Willard, who appears to be quite frustrated at the success of our characters, still yearning for the perfect death scene for his magnum opus. While Willard's motivations in Spaceland appear to be surface leveled, I'm actually excited to see how they're going to expand on this plotline in Rave. Or how they don't, because I personally believe this simplistic setup is still one of the better plotlines we've ever received. But we'll get into that with later reviews. Arriving at Bear Lake's main hut, our characters quickly take in the sounds and smells around them, before soon realizing they are once again attacked by the undead. A bit brief for my liking, but hey, whatever it takes to set up the plot, I suppose. One of Rave's best aspects is his attention to detail, color, and stylization. I always initially thought Spaceland was the game's prettiest map. As recently talked about, I enjoyed the map's vibrant color palette and its great overall representation of a theme park, with the map's aesthetics greatly playing into its gameplay, something not many of these experiences are able to accomplish to the degree to which it did, and that includes Treyarch as well. And while I enjoy the way the map is able to seamlessly incorporate these aspects together, I think I prefer the way Rave looks, from the campgrounds to the recreational area and to the local mines, but all of that is nothing compared to the way the map looks in Rave mode. Offering up a packet of drugs to one of the numerous fireplaces around the map, Rave flares to life, in an impressive display of the game's engine. Having two distinct art styles interchangeable between each other at any time is a really cool feature, and this effect applies to pretty much anything on the map players can see. From trees to additional ethereal jellyfish, to even the enemies themselves getting in on the action. What's even cooler is that these assets are loaded in real time based on which player is currently being affected by the drugs. Just like what I said in Spaceland, I cannot recommend enough for viewers to go around the map and look at all those little details both in and out of bounds. Like, something I never realized until recently was the fully modeled entrance just outside of the fishing hut. It really shouldn't be modeled, and yet it is, just outside the player's view, which I think is really neat. Then there's the map's layout, which I'm much less of a fan of. In an inverse to Jerice, Rave in the Redwoods leads players through three distinct pathways that take them to the three main areas: the cabins, the recreational area, and the beach, which offers players a boat ride to Pack-a-Punch if players manage to find all of the parts to repair it. After opening up the doors to unlock said areas, players gain access to zip lines that can be found at the map's hub. From there, you can zipline across the map to these three areas whenever you please. This is where the map's design and mechanics are inverted from Jerice. In Jerice, players are able to access the hub from the arenas, not the other way around. As discussed previously in Spaceland, Treyarch designs these arenas as choke points. Let's use Jerice again as our example. Each of these 3 labs have easy to access entrances, but with exits that only promote the same doorway and subsequent pathways players came in through, and with an unyielding horde of the undead at their side, players are given the option to take the teleporter back to the map's hub to rework their strategy and bring the map's flow and level design full circle in a linear direction. And because the map's hub already acts as the access point to these various arenas, it would be redundant to place the fast travels there, as the arenas are already locking players into difficult situations, and taking a fast travel just allows players to go over the pathway they would have already taken, as it isn't an additional pathway, it's an alternate pathway. But Derice wouldn't do something like that, as that would be a tad silly. So anyways, in Rave in the Redwoods, the map's level design features 3 wide circles that loops players around to the map's main lodge, with additional pathways slightly connecting these zones, with the mines being a great way to access both the cabins and recreational area seamlessly. But because the map requires you to do a lot of running around between these zones, there are plenty of times where you're left going from one edge of the map to the other constantly. And without teleporters or a seamless level flow, you're left dragging your feet as you book it to the next zone. Even simply placing teleporters at the end of the arenas would have gone a long way to make things feel more seamless, like something Spaceland accomplished in spades just previously, or even maps like Dead of the Night, which place teleporters and fast travels in the forest, the laboratory, and the cemetery, all very far away in distinct zones, but with fast travels to take you back to the hub. Although, to be fair, taking the zipline from the main hub to the recreational area does save a lot of time. And honestly, it's really not as egregious as I'm making it out to be. But there were definitely times where these flaws became quite apparent, notably when completing the map's version of Ghosts and Skulls, and going around to complete the many charm quests. Speaking of, from the level design, let's talk about the gameplay, starting first with Rave mode. To access this gnarly color palette swap, it's as easy as killing 20 zombies and collecting and offering up the pouch of drugs to enter an elevated state of being. Inside Rave mode, parts for the map's bows become highlighted in a dark red hue, additional pathways can be located and bought that aren't traditionally offered to the players, and on top of all of that, players are granted double points for every zombie killed. Unlike what I mentioned last time, the game actually incentivizes players to enter this mode, and by just round 6, the player can be pretty close to being fully set up. While inside of the mode, a timer naturally begins to go down, forcing players to make the most of their drug-induced high. Killing zombies will also decrease the timer significantly, but by interacting with the bundle of fairies around the map, players can extend their timer and restore what was lost. And because the fairies respawn every round, and the game litters the map with them, it becomes quite easy to juggle and loop together a combo that allows you to stay in this mode for quite an extended period of time. Much longer than a feature like this would typically allow you to access it for, like Mob of the Dead's Afterlife or Shadows of Evil's Beast mode. Fun fact, the game does not count 20 zombies from when you entered Rave mode, just that after 20 kills, the game checks if you've received a pouch or not. So if you kill 19 zombies and enter Rave mode, the next zombie you kill will offer you an additional pouch, which is pretty neat. Being able to stay in Rave mode is only at the player's advantage, and you're rewarded for balancing the timer, the zombies killed, and the fairies interacted with. Sadly, one of the few things players can't do is purchase and utilize wall buys, so by entering Rave mode, you better be quite content with your current loadout. But if you want to exit the mode as fast as possible, just shoot into a horde, allowing players easy control over how long they wish to utilize it for, which I think is really cool, and much like the Atlas Strike Team rounds in Carrier, having a feature completely under player control is a great way to make mechanics and gimmicks feel fun and rewarding. Something I never realized until making this video, while in Rave mode, if you look at the player's character card, you can see this yellow box that slowly goes down the sides. This yellow box represents the player's timer. Looking at this indicator makes it easier to gauge how much time you have left and how best to utilize the fairies around the map, which I think is super cool. But if I'm singing Rave mode's praises so much, then why isn't it something more people talk about? Well, we'll get into that more when we talk about the slasher. Moving on, let's talk about the charm system. Something I completely overlooked in the original review was these bonus quest lines. In various locations around the map, players can find trinkets and charms that can be collected. Each trinket has an optional side quest that must be completed. For example, these side quests are as easy as find a mask, place the mask on a wall, shoot the keys next to it, and collect the charm. By attaching the charm to your weapon, you'll gain a special effect. In the mask case, the charm refills the clips of stowed weapons, much like Bandolier Bandit's modifier from Black Ops 4. Then there's a binocular charm, which requires players to hunt it down, collect 10 to 15 headshots near the Fate and Fortune card machine, then shoot 8 weirdo eyeballs that can only be shot at while aimed down sights with a sniper from a gazebo. Doing all of this gives you Electric Cherry if you're near a teammate. These charms vary wildly in their effectiveness of their abilities. The shovel deals damage to enemies while you revive teammates, the arrowhead gives you a weak dead shot, the 8-ball allows you to use an impact slide that damages enemies, the fish gives you momentum, the longer you run, the more speed you build up. The frog allows you to sprint through water with no debuffs, the pacifier deals damage to the undead when they hit you, and the boots cause zombies' heads to explode when you get a headshot. And finally, there's the ring charm, easily the best of the bunch. It can be found in 2 spots fairly early on in the setup process, and once you place it down by this TV and spawn, all you have to do is light it up with these 2 lights until they're facing the ring. And that's it! Picking up the charm allows you to heal health whenever you melee. And considering the game's dodgy melee hitboxes, this charm is a blessing, and it gives players a ton of options on how they choose to play. The charms are a great system, but they all look like completely inconspicuous items, which makes it difficult for casual fans to learn about them on their own. Like, what separates the rings on the ground from any other items scattered about? This is something that applies to Treyarch as well, but in Rave's case, none of the charms are indicated to players at all, much less how to solve their quest lines. Like, how does the arrowhead equate to the shooting range and the rings to the TV and spawn? These side quests are completely nonsensical, and they fully require a guide to figure them out on your own, which is something most of the series is guilty of, and it's no different here. I now remembered why I didn't review the charms in my original video, because it was something I completely forgot had existed, and for the average player, if you didn't watch Mr. Dalek JD's video on it, it's quite possible the entire system will fly over your head. Now granted, a silhouette of the item is previewed to players whenever they open up the leaderboard, but let's say you find one of the items like the pacifier. Well, how are players supposed to figure out what the item is meant to be placed within the mess hall on the counter? And then how are players supposed to figure out how the charm's power is supposed to work? Needing an outside resource for this whole process is a real shame, as many of these abilities are lighthearted and fun. They add nice little bonuses to the gameplay loop, and charms like the rings make options like melee feel fun and rewarding to use, despite how janky it might be at times. Giving casual players fun side quests to complete adds a ton of life to a map in both player setup and content. And by having Meal Kick, players can sport up to 3 different charms at a time, giving you a ton of different options on how you choose to play. But again, the system is dragged down by archaic design philosophy, and I feel the content of the map suffers because of it. Then there's the map's melee weapons. In a first for the series, Rave in the Redwoods forces players to spawn in without their usual starting pistol, instead opting to fight with either their fist or one of 4 melee weapons scattered around the spawn room. These weapons range from a golf club, to a machete, to a 2-headed axe, or even a spiked bat. As far as I'm aware, each of these melee weapons sport the same damage values and attack speeds, so it's entirely up to player preference which one they want to use. What's really cool about these weapons is that they pair nicely with the game's Slappy Taffy, a perk that is useful on Spaceland, but because of the only melee option available to players on the map is the axe, which can only be found rarely in the box, it isn't exactly suitable in the higher rounds. But because of additions like the Ring Charm and Slappy Taffy, there was a ton of flexibility for a melee-centric build, which at the time was extremely unique to the game mode, as the only good melee options previously were the Bowie Knife, which was only good until round 9, the Galva Knuckles, which were only good until 14, or the Thunder Fist on Origins. And of course there's Gorod and Rev's time trials, but those suck. In Rave, players can spend their entire game going around just being a little gremlin. The only downside to using these weapons is that they only offer players 60 points per kill, rather than the usual 130 melee offers to the player. This was most likely done as a balancing feature, as being able to use the melee weapons alongside Slappy Taffy pretty much lets you use them forever. And finally, there's the map's camp badge and gem system. Working your way around the map, you'll find a camp badge board. Interacting with the board starts a specific Neo-like challenge. Completing said challenge allows players to obtain one of 5 special equipment. These range from the Rewind Grenade, the Black Hole Bomb, the Transponder, the Repulsor, and the Armageddon. Once the challenge is complete, these equipment can be picked up at any time, and they respawn after 1 full round. Then there's the gem system. In a 1-to-1 copy of Spaceland's coin system, zombies in Rave in the Redwoods drop one of 3 colored gems. Depositing these gems inside of a wooden totem allows players to retrieve a specific score streak. Many of these were carried over from Spaceland, with the boombox and sentry turret making a direct return. But alongside these score streaks, Rave introduces the balloon trap and the lawnmower. Holding the weapon like a chainsaw, the lawnmower can be used to rip apart the undead and can be placed down if players don't wish to carry it. And the balloon trap is fairly simple. Place it down and the undead will come in droves to grab one of these colorful balloons of fun. Sucking in the helium, the undead will begin to float upward before exploding in a gory array. Don't these zombies know that helium is going to run out in the next 25 to 30 years? They're so wasteful. Moving on, let's talk about the various wonder weapons on the map. Just like Horizon, Rave in the Redwoods is a DLC 1 map for a modern Call of Duty Zombies entry that offers players an explosive bow wonder weapon that can be upgraded into 4 distinct elemental versions. Yeah, these things stood no fighting chance initially with a comparison like that. Starting out, let's go with the Ben Franklin. This weapon produces a lightning bow effect that, okay, do you see what I mean? On the surface, the crossbows from Rave in the Redwoods are a near replica of the Horizon bow concept, with a single explosive bow that can be upgraded into 4 different elemental versions. But for this review, I'm going to try to remain as neutral as possible when it comes to a comparison, because what can I say that others haven't already said before me? Let's circle back around to the base crossbow. Featuring explosive tip, the crossbow fires out explosive bolts that can cause players self-harm. These bolts can be fired into the crowd or directly into zombies, where they'll stick in place before detonating, unlike the DE bows, which explode directly on contact. The crossbows deal decent damage on early rounds, but is prone to leaving behind crawlers way too quickly because of the game's Gibbs system, and its blast radius is rather pitiable for a weapon of this caliber. But let's talk about those upgrades. To upgrade the crossbow, players have to locate 1 of 4 statues, attach it to the speakers in the recreational area. By damaging zombies below 1/3 of their normal health, their bodies will explode and their soul will fill up the statue. That's unique. Once a statue has grown, it can be collected. Taking the statue to another larger statue, players can place their statue and begin collecting souls by getting kills with the base crossbow. Collecting around 15 to 20 souls will charge the statue, and by collecting it with the base crossbow in hand, the weapon will be automatically upgraded based on the statue players filled up. Okay, Lee Ross, have I said the word statue enough? So let's start out with the Ben Franklin. Firing down bolts of lightning, the weapon shocks the undead to their core, with an immediate shot killing around 15 to 18 zombies at a time, and temporarily stunning the rest. On the surface, it's good for an immediate get-out-of-jail-free card, but because of the undead's aggressive AI, and the lack of defensive options like a shield, the weapon is overall pretty weak, and like the Spaceland pistols, just misses that wow factor. If the Ben Franklin could permanently one-shot a horde, it would go a long way for this rather forgettable wonder weapon. The Whirlwind EF5 is like a combination between the Thunder Gun and the Wolf Bow. Firing a well-timed shot, the weapon blows away anything within its deadly range, trading out the Thunder Gun's width for the Wolf Bow's length. The weapon takes a moment to blast through the entire horde, so it's possible some undead might slip through the cracks, making it unreliable at times. Although it's definitely my favorite out of the bunch for casual play. I just kind of find this silly little goober satisfying to use. The acid rain does exactly what it says on the tin. Firing the weapon causes a flurry of acid rain to pour down upon the undead, instantly killing anything within its deadly range. This weapon has an extremely high horde killing potential, with it wiping them out in a mere instant. But due to its short particle effect time, the fun is already over before it even began. And finally, there's the Trap-O-Matic, an akimbo-style wonder weapon that allows players to make laser traps of their own. By firing down 2 bolts in close proximity to one another, players can create a deadly line that causes any zombie to run over it to instantly perish. Bolts can be applied at any time to make more goofy, albeit useless additional traps. Overall, the bows are pretty hit or miss. They're fun to use and upgrade, but really that's all they are. Just kinda fun. I feel like they're missing something, like some kind of special effect or theming. But besides all of them being crossbows, there's not much tying these ideas together. For example, if you compare the Trap-O-Matic to the other bows, it almost seems like they're trying to commit to a bow to a different playstyle players might have. That's not a bad idea in practice, but you realize Zombies has 2 playstyles, training and camping, with the latter 3 bows all falling under training, so the theming idea is lost. If you look at Alpha Omega's Elemental Raygun Mark IIs, A similarly underwhelming set of wonder weapons, the theming is changing the ray gun's weapon DNA and firing mode. Laser beam for yellow, a charged rocket launcher for orange, full auto SMG for blue, shotgun for purple, and burst rifle for the standard Mark II. It's not much, but hey, it's something. Now, don't get me wrong, not every map needs to be pushing the boundaries of what makes a wonder weapon unique, much less a set of 4. But if you're going to commit to this concept, you're going to have to make them feel special to stand out among the competition, especially when you're making 4, which is already a big commitment because the game just did that last map. The bows are already competing with the pistols in Spaceland. And in Spaceland's case, the wonder weapons, while underwhelming in ability and killing potential, made up for it with character and charm, whereas the bows don't exactly kill zombies in any unique way, and besides the Trap-O-Matic, they all might as well be glorified thunder guns, which doesn't take advantage of the 4 wonder weapon concept as much as it should. Although what's nice is that each of the bows are stored in the map's hub, making it easy to replace them at any time whenever players see it fit to do so. Something Spaceland's pistols also did as well, which I forgot to mention in the last review. And while there is another weapon that should have been the map's primary wonder weapon concept, it can be obtained upon beating the Easter egg, so we'll loop back around to that later. With the tools at our disposal, what enemies does the game throw at us? Replacing the game's clown round from Spaceland, Rave introduces the more difficult Sasquatches. Dealing heavy damage, nimble footwork, and tankier than a train, the Sasquatches are anything but their clown counterpart. They aren't exactly popcorn enemies, but to compensate for this, they are unable to spawn with the standard horde, only appearing on their own special rounds. While sporting higher health pools than most special round enemies, the Sasquatches make for perfect melee weapon fodder in the early rounds when you're trying to get set up. Sasquatches also have the ability to throw skulls at the player. You know, if I was smarter, I could tell you what that meant. And of course, who could forget the iconic slasher? But if you play a standard game of Rave in the Redwoods, you might not even encounter him. Well, that's where our beloved Rave mode comes in. Once players progress to round 10, the slasher can be found roaming around the map in Rave mode, and by roaming around the map, always teleporting to the player's location. Chasing down players at any opportunity, and just like slasher icons like Freddy, Jason, and Michael Myers, the slasher has the unique ability to appear in and out of reality wherever the scene needs him to be. But that's when it hits you. He can teleport wherever he wants, and then the slasher hits you by charging into you. And then you realize he can red screen you from full health whenever he likes. Okay, well then just try to take him down. And then it hits you again. You can't damage him. Ever. As long as players are traversing Rave mode, they are unable to damage the slasher. And here's the ticker about Rave mode. Without the slasher in play, Rave mode is quite a lot of fun. But with him in play, Rave mode becomes an absolute nightmare. At first you understand the thought process. Of course, Rave in the Redwoods is supposed to be a parody of unkillable slasher icons, so it makes sense the slasher would sport these abilities. And then you remember that this is supposed to be an FPS shooter, and the slasher is just not fun to fight. He constantly forces you to be on your toes, and if anything, he actively incentivizes players to avoid Rave mode, and this isn't helped by his high damage output and unpredictable movement patterns when traversing areas. So let's backtrack on all that praise I gave Rave mode. It's a ton of fun until round 10. Once the slasher spawns in, the mode is best left avoided, which is a real shame for the map's standout feature. And what's even worse, it's completely intentional by the developers, which further infuriates me, because you have a really unique looking mode. When you first enter Rave Vision, you feel like a puppy in an open field, given the ability to frolic around and explore the sights around you. Adding the slasher is like throwing said puppy into a tornado. So instead of feeling challenging, it feels unfair, which is a common criticism I have against the mode's gameplay, and the slasher is no exception. For example, his chainsaw rush attack that red screens the player has no predictable tell or counterplay, which makes fighting the enemy frustrating. And by fighting, I mean running, as being able to harm him under normal circumstances is basically impossible. And again, it just makes Rave mode a chore to enter. Even being able to kill the slasher with standard weaponry would go a long way. But I guess that would ruin the parody that this is supposed to be the unkillable slasher killer. My problem is, when you translate and transition different mediums and ideas, it's important to make changes that actively suit the medium that you're using. And in the slasher's case, players should have a fun time fighting the enemy, in a first-person shooter where the objective is to shoot enemies. I think the slasher is the most egregious design decision so far because there are so many little changes that can be made to fix the enemy. Giving players a shield will help avoid stray hits when other undead are around you. You can lower the slasher's damage values, which still make him a threat but not an impossibly egregious one. Or you could have the enemy susceptible to bows, just to name a few minor tweaks and solutions. Regardless, I feel there were necessary gameplay changes that should have been made. The slasher is probably one of the map's weakest aspects, and it's a shame because I like the idea on paper, but in execution it feels like the team allowed the thematics of the unkillable killer to get in the way of a satisfying gameplay loop. One I don't feel fits the game because zombies isn't built around a concept like this. For example, let's look at the Margwa, an example of a difficult to defeat enemy that sports a powerful melee attack, large area control, and immunity phases that make it difficult to slay. What sets the Margwa apart is its ability to be difficult but not unfair. I swear I brought up the Margwa when talking about the Spaceland Brute before as well. For starters, the Margwa's attacks are slow, well choreographed, and while they deal high damage, the enemy's most dangerous attack can only be used if players end up getting cornered or wound up being too close while training the beast. Then there's the Slasher, an enemy who will use its fast and nimble speed to close the gap between players rather quickly. That is, if it's not immediately teleporting to your closest position when you aren't looking. Then there's the attacks themselves. When not attacking, all the Margwa can do is close the distance between players and itself, making counterplay really easy if you take your time. Simply stay away. Whereas a Slasher manages to both attack the player and quickly close the distance with an ability that red screens players on contact. And because of the lack of defensive options and an aggressive AI, it's relatively easy to take that additional hit, leading to many unfair downs. And finally, there's the enemy's strength and vitality. The Slasher cannot be affected by damage under most circumstances, only temporarily stunned, whereas the Margwa has only 3 distinct weak points that open and close periodically, further adding on to how players approach them. I think there were so many different directions to take the Slasher, and previous enemies like the Margwa show how this concept of a difficult to kill enemy can be improved upon without making the enemy straight up unkillable. Heck, even later iterations like the Abomination from Forsaken allow the enemy to take reduced damage if players aren't hitting it in its weak spot, giving you more options on how you choose to approach it. But that's enough rambling about the Slasher. We'll get back to more about him later. And before we get into the main quest, let's talk about the map's iteration of Ghosts and Skulls with Ghosts and Skulls 2. As a sequel to the Spaceland classic, Ghosts and Skulls 2 sees players once again completing insane demands for this machine of the damned. Unlike last time, however, the questline does not require the completion of a map's main quest to advance. But like before, the steps are arbitrary and insane. There's getting specific kills with traps, hunting down symbols in Rave mode, which drove me insane due to the Slasher almost always being on the field. It really makes you realize how insane this guy's teleport game is. Throw a knife at a skull during the knife throw minigame, spell out the word skull by finding the correct symbols, playing this stupid minigame on the boat that requires you to have something called good aim, where if you know me, you know that I have the accuracy of a fish holding a gun, shoot the machine with the Ben Franklin, and finally access the minigame. It doesn't sound hard, and honestly, it really shouldn't be. But with how specific these steps are, perfection is always required, which makes completing them really difficult. But once all that is complete, seriously, I cannot stress enough how annoying the boat minigame is, you can finally access the machine. With each entry requiring a Ben Franklin shot to access it again after each failed attempt. The name of the game is color matching and memory. Entangle a ghost of a specific color, and destroy a skull of said color. Seems pretty simple on paper. Continue to attack the same color, and the amount that you destroy with one ghost will multiply with each successive hit. Although the bonus multiplier resets if you entangle a ghost of a different color, miss a shot, or go down due to laser attacks. And with how difficult it can be to lead your shots, you have to be perfect, especially in solo. And just like Ghosts and Skulls 1, the endurance test is draining, and by the end of it, I just didn't care. Yeah, I'm sorry Ghosts and Skull fanboys, this side mode is still currently a 0 for 2. It's awful. I don't really know how to improve it without asking them to just completely change it mechanically as a game mode, because honestly, it's not fun. And hey, Menobot, if you're watching this, yeah, you Menobot, I'm glad you like Ghosts and Skulls, and that goes for any fan of it out there. I'm an Easter egg guy through and through, and I love completing difficult and engaging quest lines. But Ghosts and Skulls just isn't the mode for me, and the more I play through them, the more I just kind of grow a disdain for them, which isn't exactly the best look for these going off of the fact that there's still 3 more of them to review later on. And finally, let's talk about the main quest. Unlike how problematic I found Spacelands to be, overall Rave's main quest is more palatable, with some glaring issues due to the egg involving the problematic slasher. The quest revolves around Kevin Smith and the mysterious murder of his buddy Jay, played by Jason Mewes. During the egg, you meet up with Kevin Smith and you aid him in collecting and restoring photographs that help him regain his memory as to what happened to his friend. Each time you collect a photograph, it must be cleansed by destroying and gibbing a specific body part of the undead, without outright killing them. The first ritual requires players to gib off undead arms, which seems pretty simple. You really just need a low-powered AR, and the second one requires you to gib off legs, which can be done easily with the balloon trap, and the final circle requires you to shoot off zombie heads, which is as easy as using a packed weapon. Every time a ritual is completed, you fight the slasher, one that can actually be killed. But take too long to kill him, and you'll have to redo everything all over again. Also, if you happen to fail a ritual, you will also lose one of your perks, which is just the worst. Like, thanks IW, I love being kicked when I'm already down. Like the rest of the game mode, the developers are oddly cruel to fail steps. Defeating the slasher allows you to reclaim a piece of the photo. Do this 3 times, and the egg is already done. If anything, the primary difficulty comes from defeating the slasher early on. You need a weapon that is weak enough to give zombie arms, but also one that can kill the slasher, and trying to find that right middle ground can be a difficult task, especially in solo. But once everything is complete, you go to the boss fight, where an emotionless Kevin Smith model rambles on that he actually killed his buddy Jay, revealing himself to be the slasher. In a twist that blows away the very fabric of cinema, Kevin Smith mutates and becomes the super slasher, initiating the map's boss fight. Just like the rest of the map, the boss fight makes great use of the map's Rave mode. The super slasher himself forces players to keep their distance while they attempt to fill up skulls around the arena. Once full, the slasher can be brought to a protective ritual circle where he can be struck down. Now vulnerable, players have to shoot at a variety of symbols on his body. Shoot enough and the phase ends. It's honestly quite simple, and the slasher himself does very little damage unlike his normal counterpart, making him much easier to kite around the arena. And while he might bounce around too much, I'd take this over the normal slasher any day. Once the phase ends, the slasher will summon acidic winds. Because yeah, sure, why not? Don't you guys love it when your favorite chainsaw maniac voiced by Kevin Smith summons acidic winds and skeletons to kill you? Just another Tuesday around here. Once you survive, the arena will create barriers that make it harder to reach the skulls. But honestly, it just makes it harder for the slasher to reach you, which in turn makes the fight much easier. Repeat this process 2 times, and after the 3rd set of symbols have been shot at, you can finally shoot and defeat the super slasher, condemning Kevin Smith to hell! In IW, of course. With that, our crew collects a second piece of the Soul Key, thwarting Willard's plans once again and defeating the unkillable slasher. And that's the main quest of Rave in the Redwoods, much more consistent in terms of difficulty compared to Spaceland, and I feel it's the perfect first quest for new players. Although, sadly due to IW's aggressive and unfair AI, it's definitely easier to recommend in co-op rather than solo. And overall, the boss fight is much easier to learn, and the mistakes you make can feel much more obvious than they do in Spaceland. Although, being patient is a must, even if it makes the fight go on for 15 plus minutes. In addition, like Spaceland, the quest has very little narrative throughline. Complete rituals to restore pieces of a photograph, and then fight the slasher. A bit of a shame, but nothing too egregious. But post completing the map, what other rewards await players? Well, let's find out. First off is the double pack fuses. Something I didn't bring up earlier was double pack-a-punch. If players have completed Zombies in Spaceland, the fuses will already be automatically inserted into the machine, which is really cool. But what's even cooler is the game allowing you to complete a small side quest if you haven't actually beaten Spaceland. All you have to do is turn on power, interact with this computer and spawn, come back after a few rounds, and claim the fuses. It's super simple, and I really appreciate this feature. It not only rewards players who have already beaten Spaceland, but doesn't punish those who haven't yet. Then there's the reward for beating the main Easter egg. Defeating the Super Slasher grants players access to the Smiley Chainsaw, a destructive wonder weapon that instantly kills any undead that run into its deadly path. Using ammunition over time, the longer the weapon is active. The Smiley can also fire out chainsaws like ricocheting bolts that bounce off of walls into undead. But due to the map's more open and low-to-the-ground summer camp-like design, it's difficult to get much use out of this ability. The chainsaw also has the power to kill the slasher, one of the few weapons to do so in fact. Although the effect is not only not instant, it leaves you quite vulnerable to the slasher and the undead around you, leading to an eventual down. And even if he's killed, the next time you enter Rave mode, he immediately returns. Guess you can't have everything you want in this game. But as a reward, I love the Smiley, and as the unkillable killer's killer weapon, it truly lives up to the title. And then there's those things I just forgot to talk about, which I'll bring up here. Lumberjack zombies are immune to buildable traps like the balloon trap. This will be a unique feature certain undead will have, but we'll bring that up later in Attack of the Radioactive Thing. The slasher throws insta-kill grenades. No, those are not cool, and also not fair. The Camp Badge challenge rewards respawning is super cool. Zombies that take bullet damage in Rave mode produce ethereal jellyfish upon impact and explode into a beautiful pink mist. Having the Type 2 on the wall is stupid overpowered because the Akimbo variant exists and it's so difficult to not grab them. Then there's a secret lore, only revealed through the charms. Whenever you complete and collect a charm, you'll hear a portion of a story from a person involved in the filmmaking of Rave in the Redwoods, with the various characters being actors, crew members, and Willard's own daughter, Winona. Each plotline tells the tale of a member of the film who eventually gets sucked in and killed by the slasher. These plotlines each reinforce the idea that Willard is willing to sacrifice just about anything and anyone for the sake of his filmmaking, removing all opposition that stand in the way of his dream while also reinforcing his psychotic nature. Along the way, there are hints of the fact that Willard is known to be making deals to some unseen force. Now, I don't hate this storyline. A man being driven to absolute insanity for the sake of his filmmaking makes for an engaging narrative, and the throwaway line that Willard's wife passed away further adds layers to his character. Is he doing this out of grief? Has he made a deal with the devil trying to push his work to its limits? Is he so obsessed with fame that he'd be willing to do anything to enhance his art? Is he so obsessed that he'd be willing to kill a man? These are interesting questions, and at this point in the narrative, it seems like Lee Ross and his team are writing a simple yet engaging storyline. A tortured man going to just about any length to bring back his loved one. A noble goal. Or what about a tortured man who has lost himself in his work, and thus his humanity? You don't need body-swapping possession or godly entities to make your storyline interesting. Just a good villain with a good motivation. It's a good thing nothing convoluted and completely unnecessary happens, but that's Rave in the Redwoods. And I've gotta say, I went into this re-review expecting the least of the experience. Rave always rated lower on my list, and I'm happy to say my thoughts and opinions have massively improved since the last time I went through it. Easily the greatest change I've had thus far. And I'm happy to say Rave is a map I'm actually happy to jump back into again and again. Although, as mentioned previously in Spaceland, bad hitboxes and unfair AI are a universal constant and bring down the mode whenever they happen. The map has some immaculate gameplay, with many of its strongest aspects carried over directly from Spaceland, and the visuals are some of the most impressive in the series, right up there with the Dark Ether from Die Maschine. I really enjoyed the map's gameplay loop, and charms like the rings give players a ton of additional content while providing them with small buffs that increase the player's attributes. Something very rarely tested upon besides maybe the perk upgrades in Cold War. On the flip side, the Slasher is one of the worst designed mini-bosses in the history of the series, but is also entirely avoidable if players avoid entering Rave mode past round 10, which I don't think is a good compromise. The Wonder Weapons aren't anything special, although they're significantly easier to build than an Origin Staff or a DE Bow, and the Easter egg remains more consistent in terms of difficulty compared to Spaceland. The characters are as stagnant as ever, and Kevin Smith makes for a very weak cameo, as there's not much that's done with him outside of the main quest. Willard gets fleshed out, and I'm excited to see how they develop on his character in later maps. But that's Rave in the Redwoods, an excellent addition to IW with a few rough edges that sadly prevent the experience from becoming as strong as Spaceland, but an amazing second map that manages to carry over what Spaceland started while adding new features that find their own place in this ever-evolving series. Hitting the ground running, I'm excited to see where the developers take the game next during its DLC season. Holy shit! Is that a rat high five?
That was rather boring. Now if you had died in that scene, we would have had something to work with!
Thank you all for watching. This is only part 2 of my Infinite Warfare Zombies re-review, so subscribe so you can be up to date as to when I release my re-review of Shaolin Shuffle. Hopefully there's not a 5-month gap between parts 2 and 3. And if you like this video, then I can't recommend enough my other reviews of AW, World War II, Cold War, and Black Ops 4's 9. And if you're looking for something different, how about my historical roundup of all my cut content found in the series? But with all that said, thank you for watching. And remember, keep on slaying.